Angela, I think you're on mute. It's okay.
Thank you, Erica. There goes my introduction. So welcome everyone to this another conversations on fashion and decoloniality, organized by the Research Collective for Decoloniality and Fashion. So my name is Angela, and Angela Jensen, and together with Erica de Greef, I will be convening these conversations. I'm speaking to you from a small village in the Belgian countryside in Western Europe, and Erica is joining us from the city of Cape Town in South Africa. So the aim of the conversations, which we started in February 2021, has been to disrupt colonial institutionalized ways of knowledge production and validation, and to create space for validating other ways of knowing and sensing the world that have been silenced and erased. Through decolonial ways of knowledge creation and exchange, through the communal and coalitional, and through the radical act of listening beyond institutional, disciplinary, and geographical boundaries, and especially beyond the colonial difference. We would like to remind ourselves to be respectful of each other's feelings and opinions and learnings, and most importantly, our collective and individual unlearnings. We welcome compassion, empathy, and consideration. As you all may know by now, we will be recording the first 30 minutes when we have the conversation with our guests, and then the last part will not be recorded so that we can speak more freely. So today we will be looking at the edited volume, Rethinking Fashion Globalization, that was published a year ago and that was co-edited by Sarah Cheang, Erica de Greef, and Professor Takagi Yoko. Unfortunately, Professor Takagi will not be able to join us today, but we do thank her for her ongoing support in the publication, and we share her apologies for not being able to attend the conversation today. We do have with us, we are excited to welcome two of the co-editors, Sarah Cheang and Erica de Greef, and I believe four of the contributors. So Sarah Cheang is part of the Royal College of Art in London. Erica de Greef is part of the African Fashion Research Institute in South Africa. And we have Hazel Clark with us from Parsons School of Design in New York. We have Chepkemboi Mang'ira from the collective Own Your Culture in Kenya. And Harriette Richards is not joining us in person, but she did record a little video clip. And she is from the University of Melbourne in Australia. And then last but not least, we have Daan van Dartel, who is from the National Museum of World Cultures in the Netherlands. And also she will not be able to join us in person, but she also shared a little writing with us to reflect on the publication. I hope I didn't forget anything. And so over to you, Erica.
Thank you, Angela. I wonder maybe if you could stop sharing your screen so we can just see everybody in the room. And thank you so much to everybody for joining. There's some lovely faces in the room again. And so Rethinking Fashion Globalization resulted from a 2-day seminar in February 2019, which I think for all of us is like a century ago. It was when individuals traveled freely in the world, fairly freely in the world. So 2019 February at the Bunker Gakuen University in Tokyo, and was co-organized by the Transboundary Fashion Seminar and the Research Collective for Decoloniality and Fashion. So the edited volume was published a year ago, launched a year ago, 2021, and it presented quite a timely call to rewrite the fashion system and push back against Eurocentric dominance within the fashion histories by presenting a series of new models, approaches, understandings of fashion from some critical thinkers at the forefront of what we kind of identified as decolonial fashion discourse. And so to kind of open up the talk today, we've invited Sarah, Hazel, and Chepkemboi to kind of think about how perhaps you may have shared your chapter or your book, either in coursework or journal articles or in papers. And then following on from this, how has that been in terms of your experience? How have students or colleagues responded to the book? So I really want to open it up to you, and perhaps Hazel joined us first in the waiting room this evening. So maybe we'll start with Hazel, we'll go to Chepkemboi, and maybe end with Sarah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Erica, and also Angela for the introduction, also for having this seminar around the book. There are quite a lot of things to say, but I think just diving, several things. I think going back to the February 2019 event, the symposium in Tokyo, was very valuable because it was quite a small and focused symposium. So there was time to talk, and yet actually the issues and the conversation was way extended beyond the time we had. So obviously the book is testament to that and a very valuable contribution. I think the other thing in terms of timing to say for those of us, particularly, obviously not exclusively, but particularly in the United States, the events of 2020 particularly have focused attention, long overdue attention on issues around social justice, activism, equality, race, ethnicity. So again, in that sense, the timing of the book published last year from the point of view of teaching was extremely valuable. Specifically, I teach one of our introductory courses, and so does a colleague, on the Masters in Fashion Studies program, which I started and now direct at the moment at Parsons, where we look at key concepts in fashion studies. And that actually was particularly demanding this year, because some of the, many of the kind of key concepts, the scholars which we had previously almost taken for granted we were using in that course, we had to rethink, and students were questioning. So for that course in particular, the foreword to the book and the first chapter was very, very useful when we were thinking about expanding and decentering how we think about fashion, and then how we engage in fashion studies. So that was a very, is a very valuable framework. And I think really sort of synthesize one of the contributions this book makes, certainly for students, is to help them think about, I guess there are two perhaps current, consistent definitions of fashion. One is about trends and time and modernity, but the other, which we tend not to use so much, is about a manner of doing something, a manner of dressing. And this book helps us to think about that second definition of fashion, the way we fashion ourselves, the way we dress, the way we have agency, the way that is very much diversified across people across the world and across time, and yet there are also distinct consistencies and synergies. So with the chapter I contributed to the book, the last chapter, which I co-wrote with my friend and colleague Alla Eisenberg, we were intrigued to look at the ordinary and the everyday through the lens of two different designers with whom we were familiar, both working at the end of the 20th century. For me, Ma Ke, working in China, and for Alla, Gosha Rubchinsky, working in Russia. And what was interesting, and we sort of played on in our chapter, was the fact that although they were both, each was looking at the everyday in the period, the sort of 1980s, 1990s, so they were almost contemporary. Those everydays were very, very different. And they were drawing on what we were calling rather grandly new sartorial languages, but they were drawing on the cultures in which they had grown up and with which they were familiar, but in ways that were way other than the cultural stereotypes that are sometimes recognized and associated with Russia and China, which we mentioned in the chapter. So it was very much experiential. It was very much thinking about agency. It was very much thinking about where fashion emerges from and how fashion emerges. In this case, looking at the work of two designers, but also I think thinking about fashion's place beyond and alongside the fashion system, and certainly as an agent of culture. So maybe I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Hazel. I think that's a great segue for Chepkemboi to come in there. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. In the book, I wrote a chapter on the framework that I used to develop my online community, that is On Your Culture, where we style traditional jewelry as a way of decolonizing fashion perceptions, and some of the results that ensued from conducting this work, and also the comments and interactions that I've had with this whole virtual community. In the chapter, I've shared some of, and I've also shared this work through different lectures. I've done some talks in my former university, University of Nairobi. I was also a guest lecturer at FIT in New York in April this year. I've also talked about my chapter in some podcasts locally and in the continent. I've also shared the book with different institutions where I've done my research in Kenya, as well as talking about it with my online community. The biggest challenge here has been accessing the physical copy of the book, especially for the institutions. Ordering via Amazon presents some delays sometimes as well, or the book order is cancelled and the money is refunded. Teaching at, I think the most memorable thing has been teaching at FIT, which was very fascinating. So much so that there was a member of the administration who is African American who listened in and emailed me afterwards to express a lot of gratitude in getting to see such rich history about Africans, the different fashion systems coming from Kenya, and how African traditional fashion has evolved, and it was not static. This reminded me of the importance of sharing this work, not just here in the continent, but how it reframes a lot for people of color across the world, and also to show that traditional fashion isn't static. And in giving talks locally and speaking in different fashion forums here, I've come to learn that there are missing gaps on documentation of Kenyan fashion history, especially by Kenyans who, by virtue of having lived these actual experiences. In some of the talks that I've given in the universities, I've heard from most of the faculty that there isn't a specific or particular record, especially by Kenyans, over the complete fashion history of what it was before, what it has been over the years. There have just been different historians who focused on different communities or just a certain aspect, or just maybe a particular design method, but not the comprehensive aspect of what Kenyan fashion history has been. So it's been very interesting to interact on that end. Yeah, so that's been my experience so far.
Thank you. And Sarah, I think you have some things to share as well.
Yeah, thank you. I work in London and I teach design history. So I'm teaching within a broader department where we're very focused on how you tell new stories about being on this planet through material culture. And that's always been my key interest in fashion, is this amazing material object that sits on the body and what that does to our experiences of being in the world. I'd always been teaching, well, no, that's a lie. For a long time, I'd been teaching a course that was about fashion and race. And through working closely with Angela and Erica and others, I'd come to reframe that course as more of a decolonizing fashion history course. And then one thing I wanted to say about the whole experience of co-editing this book and writing this book, and the experience of meeting you all in Tokyo, was the way it shifted my thinking again from the idea that I was going to teach again my course about decolonizing fashion. It shifted me into thinking, I'm going to be bold and shift this back to the idea that I'm going to teach a course on global fashion. But the big difference was that when I first began teaching courses called global fashion, or words to that effect, which I'd had to do for a number of years at London College of Fashion before I moved to the RCA, I was being asked to just teach something that was going to just deliver that sense of all the exotic world and all the amazing fashions that are in it. And I made a very deliberate move to stop using the word global in the title of my courses, because it felt to me like it was a sort of consuming the idea of the global, but not actually doing anything that I wanted to do to challenge the structures and the inequalities and so on. So I felt really emboldened through having done this book to say, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to reclaim this word global, and I'm going to understand it, first of all, as, well, I'm going to embrace the fact that fashion is global, and secondly, that it's global in ways that go way beyond the idea of the globalization of Western fashion, which, as we know, has been a sort of standard model for thinking about globalization. And thirdly, thinking about reframing fashion as global again enables us to think about our interconnected world in a very literal sense, and our interconnected responsibilities. So all of these shifts meant that I was still very much, the teaching that I was doing was then still very much charged with the idea of how important it was to think about decoloniality and work with decoloniality. But I really was able to just bring that more into a kind of more of a synergy or a dialogue, or a kind of more natural state of being with this idea of what is global fashion? How should we talk about fashion? How should we be with fashion, but have this global sense of fashion that isn't just a commoditization of the other, and isn't actually collapsing back into the creation of national boundaries, regional boundaries, and the sort of meta-geographies of East and West and North and South and so on. So I think the book's been really pivotal for me. Now, how I use it in my teaching is questionable, because I'm one of those people who inevitably I put quite a lot of things on my reading list that I've written, but I feel really embarrassed to discuss it with my students. So I tend to put it on the list, but I don't necessarily put it as required reading. And then quite often I somehow don't make time for the discussion in class. So we talk about everybody else's readings and I somehow can't do it. So I honestly couldn't tell you how I've taught with it since it was published, but before it was published, I definitely taught with it, because I was inviting my students to help me think through the ideas in the book as part of the seminars that we were doing and in the course structure. And also some of my students helped us with drawing up the index as well. So it was very central to my teaching in the moment of production, and then I'm too embarrassed to give it to my students and make them discuss it in front of me. And I'd really like to hear actually from others how you handle that, because for me it's a bit of a weird problem. But I have been speaking to others who've been teaching with it, and there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One was a colleague of mine was saying that she recommends it to students who are grappling with the idea of the transnational as a way to help them work with that term, but without reinforcing the national. In fact, she feels that really strongly that the kinds of chapters that are in the book are reworking the idea of the transnational in a very in ways that are very nuanced and don't collapse back into the very problems that we were trying to challenge with the book. A second person was saying to me that she's been using it for BA students, first year BA students, first of all, to enable them to talk about global and local. So the book's been important there. And secondly, she's used it to give them examples of other kinds of writing, other kinds of academic writing. And the particular chapter she was thinking about there was actually the one about the Ghanaian fashion posters, which is an interesting one to pick on because it actually is the voice of two different authors with very different writing styles, plus the influence of the editors in terms of how the chapter was framed and so on. So it is a very interesting chapter to think about in terms of voice. So I think that my feeling is that I'm seeing how the book is landing and actually doing good service in terms of people wanting to give their students a way of talking about global and local, national, international, transnational, but in ways that move the debate forward, perhaps, rather than getting it stuck in an endless cycle of reinforcing the very things that we're trying to get rid of.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Wow.
Oh, can I make one more comment? Sorry, one more comment. I'm really wary of anything that's to do with measuring success in the classroom. I think that these kinds of metrics are bound up in all kinds of capitalist frameworks around education. And I'm also very interested in the idea of the sort of slow burn and the transformation that happens through education that isn't perhaps captured in the moment or even at the end of the course or in the pass rate or the feedback forms that students do, but it's might happen in so many different ways. So I just made that very bold statement that I feel like the book is doing good service, but I would not in any way want to claim that I could measure that right now, or that it is measurable, or that it should be measurable.
Thank you, Sarah. No, absolutely. I think the nuances of these kind of slow movements, and maybe that's also just something that we're opening into this conversation. It's just like these kinds of small ignitions, kind of in a way that are kind of being made possible through the publication, and maybe the kind of scope that we're looking at from New York to Kenya to London, and maybe Angela, if you want to share from Harriette and Daan, so we're kind of looking at Australia and the Netherlands, so we're really kind of getting a global kind of sense of where the book is finding some kind of root. Maybe just unmute yourself again, Angela.
Is it visible now?
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is. Oh, great. Sorry. Multitasking, trying.
Kia ora koutou. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Harriette Richards. I'm a lecturer in fashion enterprise at the School of Fashion and Textiles at RMIT University here in Melbourne. I'm also the co-founder of the Critical Fashion Studies Research Group here at the University of Melbourne as well. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today. Unfortunately, I can't be there with you live. The time difference just didn't quite work for me, but I'm really thrilled that I can provide this short video in celebration of the 1-year anniversary of the publication of this beautiful book, Rethinking Fashion Globalization. Before I continue, I would like to acknowledge that I'm currently on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I would like to extend my respects to Wurundjeri elders past and present, and to any First Nations contributors and audience members who we might have with us here today. As a Pākehā New Zealander, I feel a particular sense of gratitude of being able to call the lands of the Wurundjeri people my home. And I'm always honoured to be able to participate in events such as these, which extend long-standing traditions of gathering, knowledge sharing, and celebration. So my chapter in the book is entitled Erasure, Forgetting and the Practice of Memory, Decolonising Fashion in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's chapter 8. The work is a continuation of research that commenced during my doctorate, in which I investigated the aesthetics of melancholia in fashion and cultural identity in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Since attending the Rethinking Fashion Globalization seminar, organised by the Research Collective for Decolonising Fashion and hosted in Tokyo in 2019, decentering fashion narratives has become a central tenet of my work. I think that this is especially important in the context of Aotearoa, New Zealand, where there is such a strong tradition of non-Western garment making and adornment. Yet for a long time, this has been excluded from conversations about fashion, which is part of what I'm trying to redress in this article, this chapter, and other work that I've done. Since the publication of the book 1 year ago, I've been really honoured to be able to share the work and the other chapters in the book and the book as a whole with my students, especially in a couple of subjects that I taught at the University of Melbourne in my previous position there last year, and in some new work that I'm doing in my new position at RMIT. One of the places where I've shared the work is in a special guest lecture on fashion and beauty for students in the second year gender and contemporary culture subject at the University of Melbourne, which I'll present again later this year. In my new role at RMIT University, I'm excited to share the work with my Bachelor of Fashion Enterprise students, especially in the new capstone subject that I've developed, where students, and it's this one, Fashion Enterprise Project launch, where students will undertake independent research projects investigating key areas of interest in relation to the global fashion industry. In terms of broader conversations about decentering fashion knowledges, I do think that this has changed quite significantly in recent years. One of the new subjects that I'll be teaching at RMIT University is a compulsory first year subject, which all students across the school must take. The subject, Fashion, Textiles, Place and Story, focuses on stories of place and experiences of belonging, introducing students to Indigenous and local perspectives and practices through which they can rethink their relationship to and place within the fashion and textiles industry. This subject was included in the school offering in 2020, so it is very new, and has had a significant impact on how our students conceive of their place within the industry and indeed the world. Personally, the publication of my chapter in this book has further solidified my reputation for scholarship about fashion in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This has had a wonderful outcome of connecting me with other scholars and practitioners. For example, Jennifer Whitty, who's an assistant professor in fashion systems at Parsons and was previously a leader in the decolonisation of fashion curriculum at Massey University in Wellington. And also Doris DuPont, who is the founder and director of the New Zealand Fashion Museum and a fierce advocate for sharing the mahi, the work of diverse fashion and textiles practitioners in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's my absolute honour, in fact, to have been invited by Doris to be an advisor on the contribution that she's presenting to the global fashion agenda later this year. So I think I'll just stop there. They're my brief reflections on the year that has been since the publication of this really quite remarkable book. And I really wish you all the best and have a wonderful year to come as well, continuing the work that we began with the publication of this book. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Shall I continue with Daan's reflection? And shall I read it? Yeah. So Daan wrote us a little reflection where she states that my chapter in the book is called Afro-Surinamese Koto Missie, Fashion and the Ethnographic Museum, in which I try to use fashion as a new lens in my National Museums of World Cultures. This museum has many textile and dress collections, but never the word fashion was used in any presentations. So for the koto, which is the traditional full dress style of Afro-Surinamese women, I tried to develop a new way of thinking through fashion, including its diverse and transnational histories, and its partaking in different fashion systems at the same time. I have not really shared the paper very much, since I thought that it is copyrighted to Bloomsbury. What I did do is tell people from Surinamese community networks that I wrote the article and send them a copy, or they bought the book for their library. I do use the article for different lectures, like with Sarah's class at the Royal School of Art, but also Dutch universities and academies. What is very interesting is that I was able to take part in a special koto project of an Amsterdam-based community-oriented institution, Image IC, including curators, textile experts, and community experts, which even ended in the development of a special headcloth, Angisa, for all participants. We also started working way more with local experts on the koto and Angisa because of the growing interest on the side of the museum. So that is Daan's contribution, her reflection on the book, on her book chapter.
Thank you, Angela. I think we are about 30 minutes. So maybe we can end the recording. And I know that there's so much more to discuss.